Hi, welcome, and thank you so much for being here tonight to attend this webinar titled Smart Music and Differentiated Learning. My name is Giovanna Cruz, and I am an Education Services Manager at Make Music. Before that, I was an orchestra teacher in Austin, Texas, and I use Smart Music with all my students. Here with me as well is Lee Kalistad, the other education manager, and he can tell you a little bit about himself before we get started. Thank you so much again for being here today.
Well, thank you. And my name is Lee Kalistad, and I work with my colleague Giovanna here as part of the music education team. Before that, I taught a career with bands and choirs. And now with Giovanna, we put together clinics and conventions, trainings, e-learning, and webinars. So one of the great benefits of that is we see really wonderful teachers learning how to use technology and hopefully helping students in a better way and perhaps finding a little more balance in their lives. So I'll be collecting the questions. So when you have a chat question anytime through this, to Lee Kalistad down in the bottom right corner in your chat pop-up window.
Thank you, Lee. So here with us today are Kevin Mead and Terry Bacon. Let me start with Kevin. Kevin is from New York State. He's been a band director for 34 years, most of them spent in the Churchville-Chili High School district in Rochester, New York. He's currently the Senior High School's Select Wind Ensemble and Jazz Band Director. He's earned many superior ratings and first place performances throughout the East Coast. He's also an awarded teacher. He earned the Triple C Award for Service twice, and as well as the Teacher of the Year Award. He is also the recipient of the Monroe County Legislature Youth Advocate of the Year Award. And his contact information is at the bottom of the slide. So if you have any additional questions throughout this webinar that we don't get answered, feel free to give him a call or send him an email. Also here with us today is Terry Bacon. Terry works with Kevin at the same school district. Terry has been a band director for 18 years. He's currently the director of the senior high school's symphonic band, and he also teaches IB Music 1 and 2 and digital music. Not happy with just that, he's also a PhD candidate at the University of Buffalo, and he's adjunct faculty at the State University of New York. He teaches courses in instrumental teaching methods, measurement and evaluation, and technology in music ed. He's professional development faculty for Gordon Institute for Music Learning. And also at the bottom of this slide is his contact information. So again, feel free to give him a call or send him an email with additional questions if we don't get to your question today.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Kevin and I, are very fortunate. I think we should lead off by saying that we are teachers in New York. So that means that in our program, we get to see students every other day for band, but we also once a week get to see students for a half block for lessons. Probably what you're going to see from us is going to be familiar if many of you are classic users. We are classic SmartMusic users. We haven't moved yet to the new SmartMusic, but we are in a transition. So we hope to illustrate tonight how many of the things that we have done in classic SmartMusic are going to be applicable to the new SmartMusic. First, I want to start, though, with the foundations of our program. Both Kevin and I believe that music is learned as language is learned. And if we think about language learning, children first listen to a language and then they begin to speak. And we really like to encourage our students to listen, to speak on their instruments. And part of that is being able to improvise. We learn to communicate in language by improvising it and getting responses. And so improvisation is a very large part of our program, not jazz improvisation, just improvisation. And then we also know that improvising in a language will eventually lead to reading and writing. And we also have that as an important part of our program. We have students composing to make them better readers. Finally, I think the ultimate goal of what we do is to get our kids to think musically. We want them to audiate when they leave our program. So we're trying to foster audiation through instrumental music. So we know that trying to differentiate instruction, trying to teach to students' individual needs and differences requires accurate information. And like all teachers, we use both a combination of informal and formal assessments. And several years ago, long before the whole annual professional performance review, SLO, student learning objective thing became a thing, we started toying around with making a formal pre-test and post-test as a way of giving us some baseline information on how our students perform. So that's where we're going to start tonight, is looking at this formal assessment. Now, we're very concerned in all of our assessments that they're reliable, that when we give an assessment, we're going to get some information, and if we give it again, we're going to be getting, hopefully, similar information or information that's going to show growth. We're also concerned that our instrument is valid. We want to make sure that if we're testing students for what they can and cannot do musically, that's what our measures are showing. So that leads us back to basic instrument assessment instrument design. First off, you got to ask yourself, what do you teach? And then decide what you're going to measure. Hopefully, we're measuring what it is that we're teaching, and then we evaluate the results and the instrument that we're using, the test that we're using to measure those students. And then we use that data to improve both teaching and the test. And then lather, rinse, repeat. We start over from the top, figuring out how we modify as we go. SmartMusic has been the perfect tool for that, to allow us to both gather data and be able to go back and analyze that data both objectively and subjectively. And now here's Kevin.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, we chose to use SmartMusic for our tool because we were very familiar with it. Our students were very familiar with it, and it seemed to be the best tool we could find in order to accumulate all of the data that we wanted. The first step that we had to take was to decide what it was we wanted to measure, and we just selected several categories that we could break skills up. Things like articulation, tone, triple meter, duple meter. We wanted to break those up, and we decided to test each one individually. So we selected examples within the vast supply that SmartMusic has that would test just those skills. We tried to find an articulation exercise that would test articulation but wouldn't test something else, so that the articulation is what would be tested. It wouldn't be challenging for the student. If it was a clarinet piece, and we know our clarinet players are having a hard time going over the break, the test for articulation wouldn't go over the break, and so forth. So we were very careful in picking the pieces that we wanted. We're also familiar with SmartMusic has this internal assessment, which it can create it can grade whether the student played the right note at the right time, but at the same time, it can't grade our articulation or tone. So teacher-generated rubrics were created to measure the student performance on all of those categories. We also included in our pre-test an essay on evaluating a performance, where we'd play a performance of an ensemble and ask our kids to write about that performance. And we also had a composition where they were to create something from scratch. And we decided to put that in there, so at the post-test at the end, there was our reminder that every once in a while, we've got to help these kids to be better at those skills also. And of course, meeting the new national standards was in the back of our mind. We used the same examples and the testing procedure that for the post and the pre-test. So each test was exactly the same so that we could measure apples to apples. The advantages, of course, the amount of data that we collected was absolutely absurd, but we were able to use it to our advantage. The recordings that were available for future comparisons, if we wanted to go back and see if tone improved, we could go back 2 years and see if Susie's tone was better than 2 years ago. And if it was, what kind of things did she do to improve? The objective and the subjective grading. The objective grading from SmartMusic versus our grading, it was enlightening to find out that sometimes the objective grade was off the charts, but the subjective grading was not close. They were playing the piece very well, but the articulation wasn't quite there. And the opposite was also very common. The rubrics that we created, we spent an awful lot of time on. It was important to us that if we had 600 teachers grading this one example, most of them would come up with the exact same answer. So the rubric had to be specific. It couldn't just be tone, good tone, better tone. It had to be specific to that. So we've created rubrics to help us grade for consistency purposes. And the data that we've collected, of course, is what we use to improve both our large ensembles and our individual instruction.
So when you're just creating a test, the first thing you have to do is look at what you teach and make a decision on what you want to test. So we've got some suggestions here. Perhaps you want to look at performance. In an ensemble, that's pretty important. So we were maybe looking at your sight reading or sight singing skills, students' performance in rhythm, but specifically what in rhythm? Is it duple meter, triple meter, maybe scales, key recognition, a number of different performance units. We also, as Kevin mentioned, looked at different written aspects. We wanted to see how well our students are able to use the technical language of music, as well as can they compose? Can they write down their own musical thoughts? So when you're deciding what to test, it can be a combination of any of these items. Then you got to make a decision. How are you going to grade this assessment? Are you going to be looking at the overall performance, looking at everything that's going on, or looking at individual skills? For us, it was important to break out those individual skills to try to figure out what exactly students were struggling with so that we could focus in our instruction as well as perhaps in their groups how best to meet their needs. Then you got to decide the number of examples that you're going to use. Now, the great thing is if you have a ton of examples, you're going to get a ton of data. The bad thing is that you're going to get a ton of data. And so that's going to mean more time grading. So you have to be smart about how much do you want to use versus how little. And of course, then it comes down to that SmartMusic grade, that red note, green note grade. How well are these students performing the correct pitch at the correct time? But as Kevin said, what we found was we would get examples where students would nail, have 100% on that SmartMusic grade. But when we listened to their articulation, it wasn't good. Or the opposite. They were getting really, really bad scores, but we would listen to the recording and go, oh man, this kid can't keep time, but they've got a pretty good tone, or maybe they can articulate really, really well. So that leads us to designing those rubrics. So for rubric design, you want to make sure that you're writing clear, well-defined rubrics so that they can be consistent. Again, we go back to that reliability and validity part. We want to have inter-judge reliability. If Kevin's grading them or I'm grading them, we want to be close. I apparently, between the two of us, am the Simon Cowell of the group. I'm consistently always just about a point harder on the students than Kevin. But we want to also make sure that we're using easy, grade appropriate language. These rubrics aren't just for us, they're for the students. So we return to them throughout the year. It's not just something for the pretest. So we want to make sure that our rubrics are grade appropriate so our kids can look at them and go, oh, okay, that's what a 2 is, and I'm trying to get to a 3. So I think I touched on everything here, usable by student and teacher, and the iterator reliability. So here's an example of the rubrics that we ended up using for our pretest. We focused on pulse, rhythm, articulation, key recognition, and tone. So we developed a series of rubrics from developing through superior for each of those. And as I said, we returned to those rubrics throughout the year. Finally, when you're figuring out what you might want to use for a pretest, post-test, you're going to want to use examples in SmartMusic. And there are so many examples there. You have all of those great method books, all of those exercises. And if that fails, write your own. Write them in Finale and then create a music XML file to go ahead and import it over. You do want to be careful about setting up the example exactly the way you want the student to see it. And in our early days, we made a couple of mistakes. A couple of students got some freebies where we forgot to turn some things on or turn some things off. So we want to double check the tempo, make sure the sight reading feature is on so that they get some time to practice, but not a whole lot of time to practice. And of course, changing the assignment names so they don't know what exercise you're using.
Now, when it came down to administering the test, we wanted to be as consistent as possible so that we could make sure that we're measuring exactly what we want to measure. We don't want to measure whether they're playing the right note at the right time when we're actually looking for articulation. So the one thing that we had decided with a lot of discussion was to utilize the sight reading feature in SmartMusic. And the thing we liked about that was once the student was done performing, the submission was instant. So they couldn't play it a few times, figure it out, try it, listen to it. It was a one-shot deal. But at the same point, we didn't want to only grade sight reading skills. If we just assigned everybody a quick sight reading, we could have 6 items and all we're really judging is their sight reading skills. So we gave them 60 seconds of practice time. Very short examples. Within 60 seconds, they know it's an articulation exercise when they open it. They've got 60 seconds to practice the articulation. We should get a pretty good idea whether they're able to articulate correctly or not, thus taking the sight reading only feature out of our test. Another thing about anytime you use technology in your classroom, make sure it works before you get in front of the kids. It works so much better. Plus, each kid gets the same experience when everything is working correctly. Another thing that we really insisted on was that the students did not take the test all in the same room, because if you've got 10 kids in a room, the 10th kid has heard the exercises 10 times, and he's got a big advantage over the kid that took it the very first time, and that's not giving us consistent data at all either. Now, this is a sample of the classic SmartMusic gradebook view that we received when all of the kids have taken the test. You see the SmartMusic grade on the left. That's how SmartMusic graded them. And on the right is just the reminder that the teachers are going to go in, listen to those, use the rubric, and put that grade in there. We also have taken a moment to show you what a the new SmartMusic gradebook view looks like. Very similar, same information available to you. But we thought we'd just take a minute here to show you a video that helps explain how the SmartMusic grade versus what you're trying to measure, how those two can be different. So, and it also happens to show you the benefits of having a really well-written rubric. So we'll watch the video.
Yes, Kevin, and this video that you guys are going to hear is one that Lee and I recorded a while ago. We are actually talking about this experience that Kevin and Terry have been sharing with you today. So you're going to hear us having a conversational tone as we discuss a particular example.
What it did and how it worked, then I can probably bring in what he did with that information afterwards.
Okay.
So in this case, we don't even need to play it. We can look at all the tonguing and slurring marks. This would be a pretty standard piece of music for a younger student. Are your articulations going in the right spots? So knowing that, there's at least 10 spots here that need to be tongued and slurred specifically. So as the assignment process, you would give directions about the assignment, and then you'd set up the rubric like Kevin did, in this case, 5 levels for articulation. And if you look at the edit button, it shows 20%, you really can't even hear what's going on. At 40%, you can hear something, but it's not going too well. At 60%, you had between 2 and 5 mistakes. And then at 80%, you have 1 mistake, and 100%, it's perfect. So knowing that ahead of time, the student can get to work on their assignment. They can do it over and over again. And so in this case, we'll send that out with 100 points, and that'll go out to the student. It'll come back to the grade book. And now when Kevin opens up the assignment, it will have that student recording, and he can listen very carefully to what was submitted.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and I noticed that the student can send a note too to the teacher. So here's that submission. So
at face value, if you were just grading this looks like a pretty good score. All the notes are right except the last one. There's probably an A minus.
Yeah, but we're not listening for notes and rhythms, we're listening for articulation, right?
Which is harder to do than you'd think. So once he did just that, what he found was, well, let's listen to that and see how we score that. And then we can hear there's a mistake here. Last note of the line wasn't tongued. There's 2 mistakes.
Was that slurred?
That was slurred. That's 3. And 4 mistakes.
Based on the rubric. And the next step is to take all of that information within the gradebook of SmartMusic and export it into a file where you can accumulate it, manipulate it, tally it. You can keep that information handy. We happen to use Excel, and we did use classic SmartMusic, but it's also just as easy to do in the new SmartMusic. But we did create a quick video so you could watch that too. So go ahead and show that video.
Exporting data. At the end of every grading period, or more often, depending on your needs, you will likely want to export your grading data. From the home page, click Gradebook. Select a class from the drop-down menu and click Export. You will be given an option to export as a CSV file or an Excel file. Choose your preferred option and click Export. The file is downloaded to your computer. You can open this file and reformat it to best fit your needs. You may want to use the data to measure growth, share with parents and administrators, or simply to turn around and upload to your district's official gradebook.
And here is what the data that we collected after that amount of time and working next to a doctoral candidate on assessment. We had a lot of data, but it was so effective for us. You can see that the SmartMusic grades were changed to the rubric. That was just to match it. A little bit of voodoo math was done to do that, but everything is consistent from left to right all the way across. On the far right are the individual student performance numbers so that we can tell where our strong kids are, where our weak kids are, but more importantly, the meat is in the middle. Where are they strong and where are they weak? We can also tell as a program, where is our program strong and where is our program weak? If you can read it, I'm not sure you can, but under SmartMusic triple meter on the very bottom, that's the lowest average we received. It's a 1.43 as an average. Our program was suffering in triple meter. We looked back at the concert programs that the kids have done over years, and very little was ever done for triple meter. So we started plugging triple meter. We did triple meter exercises. We did triple meter pieces. And our effort was to get that number up. Now, before we go into showing you exactly how we did that, we thought we'd just take a moment and see if Lee came across any questions or anything that we can answer at this point.
Okay, so here's a question. How do you administer these assessments? During lessons or ensembles? That question is coming from Joe.
We happen to do it in our program during lessons because we have lessons available. Our chorus teacher, who went through the same process, did it during rehearsals, where he would have one student at a time exit his rehearsal, go into a practice room that was set up with SmartMusic. The student would take the exam, come back to the rehearsal, tag the next student who would go in. It did take a little while for him to do that, but the interruption to his rehearsal was quite minimal. So both are an option.
And another question. Were all your assessments recorded at school? This is Larry asking the question.
Yes, we wanted to make sure that the person playing the assessment was the student that was putting his name attached to the assessment for a couple reasons. But the main was for consistency. We wanted to make sure that Johnny didn't pay Susie to play the saxophone for him.
Great. Great, Kevin. Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Here's one. Do all students have subscriptions to SmartMusic?
Terry,
That's one of the great benefits of our district. Several years ago, we had a director of fine arts who realized that this was our textbook. So all of the students instrumentally in grades 9 through 12 do get a SmartMusic subscription as their electronic textbook, which the district likes because then that gets reimbursed as a textbook. I know that for our choral program, we have practice room subscriptions, and all of the teachers in our district do get the old practice room, the teacher subscription, but they're not using it quite to the level that Kevin and I are using it.
And I think this will be the last question before we move on. Do you use SmartMusic in your rehearsal setting with a projector and screen showing students music, etc.?
Absolutely. We actually have both setups in our rehearsal room, as well as we had our maintenance department and our technology folks. We have practice room with a couple of computers in it, and so they jury rigged a projector up on the wall, and we have a great big giant white wall on the other side, so we'll have the students turn away from the computers and be able to look at things on the wall. And then when we want to do some individual work with the students to make sure that they're comfortable using SmartMusic, we'll have them turn around and use the individual stations.
And this is Lee. I have a couple other questions that we can do at the next question spot. So remember, if you're doing questions, chat them to Lee Callisted, and I've got a couple more copied for the next question time. Okay.
So you have a giant pile of data. What do you do with it? Well, the first thing you have to do is look at it. We want to, every time we do this, we get a little bit overwhelmed, Kevin and I, but we take a deep breath and we dive in. So we review everything that we've collected and try to see what kind of trends we notice. We're looking for individual strengths and weaknesses in students, as well as trying to identify strengths and weaknesses in our whole program. Then we use that to lesson plan. We're making both individual and group repertoire choices throughout the year to help improve the student performance on the skills that we've identified as weaknesses. As Kevin noted, we saw a real weakness in our program in triple meter. So we both made sure that we picked some band music that used 6/8, 9/8, 12/8. We made sure that we were doing rhythm chanting in triple meter. We were doing individual exercises in triple meter as a way to help improve that. The other thing that we did is we printed out the individual student scores to include in our grade book and lesson planning book so that it acted as a reminder. So on the next screen, you'll notice that we began to organize the data. We took Excel and started grouping things in terms of our lesson groups for our pull-out lessons. We do have that as an advantage. So we were able to group students based on instrument, but then also looking at, well, it might make sense to put a group that needs some help with their tone, put them together so that we can really take that group and individualize working on tone, maybe not necessarily working on some of the other skills. And then to help us, we have a shared lesson grade book. And so we took some scissors, cut them off, and pasted them onto these gradebook pages. So we could just quickly jot notes, kind of old school, maybe not necessarily the latest and greatest in technology, but we found that doing it in a notebook was helpful. That way we could communicate back and forth with each other, especially if it was something we decided to team teach that week. So,
Okay, so go ahead.
I was going to say, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, then I will then. Giving a couple examples, and these are only specific examples to us, and the idea for the lesson plan can be used to the best of your ability. But for the kids that were struggling a bit on rhythmic patterns, we identified, putting them in a group, we had time to work with them. We identified that one of the things they were really struggling with was the dotted quarter note, eighth note pattern. Hard to believe for high school kids, but I got to tell you, it was enlightening to find out that pattern was just driving them crazy. So what we did with those kids is began their lesson by simply echoing patterns as a warm-up, echoing dotted note, eighth note patterns, no music anywhere to be seen, until they were comfortable repeating what we were chanting to them. Once they were comfortable with that, we put it on a screen and show them what they've been chanting. And we found a very simple one, simple time 2, pattern 16. We call it, they see it, they can see it now. They can see what they've been able to chant without seeing it. And then the next step was to simply give them an assignment. Once I felt comfortable with their ability to do that, was to give an assignment just to see if they're really grasping it. And this is a quick example that we found. And if I assign this and they're able to perform it, I'm moving on to the next thing. If they're not able to perform it, I'm going back and going through the process until they can. Another example is articulation. For the students that were struggling with articulation, or in our case, there was enough kids struggling that we thought we'd have right in the rehearsal. Pick up our instrument, call and respond, an articulation, a simple pattern that wasn't going to challenge them in any way, a scale rhythm pattern or something like that, with different articulations, call and respond. Once again, no music on the screen, so all they're doing is using their listening skills, listening to what we're doing and trying to imitate. Once they were able to imitate comfortably what we were doing, then we'd display the notation on the screen and we'd continue doing the call and response so that they can see what they're actually playing. And the next step is to have them look at the notation and play it for us. They become the caller, we become the responder, and we'd move on as assign it as an exercise to reinforce it. And the nice thing here about SmartMusic is if I've got kids that are doing very well, I can assign a difficult articulation exercise. If I got students that are struggling, I can assign a simple one, or I can change the tempo so that the exercise itself is not going to trip them up. They'll have time to work on the articulation. They'll be able to focus on that. We actually created a document and sent it off to Music XML so that the kids all had an assignment similar to this, although it was an entire page of a very similar pattern with different articulations. And we would continue to assign it to the kids and work with the kids until they were able to be successful.
Improvisation is an important part of our program. And we found that when we're developing listening and performing skills with students, notation can really be a stumbling block. So one way is to incorporate improvisation as a way of getting away from the notation. It also can be a great way to teach a number of different skills. So the procedure we tend to follow is we'll have the kids learn a head tune, maybe a simple folk tune with no notation, simple harmonic functions, just tonic and dominant, duple meter to get them started so that they can be successful. That's the important thing. We want them to be successful learning a song by ear. Then we'll teach them the bass line without notation. And if it's just tonic and dominant, you just might end up with a bass line like bum, 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 bum. And as they become comfortable, they know the bass line, we'll ask them, go ahead and improvise an interesting rhythm just on those chord roots. That way we're looking at pulse. Can they perform with a steady pulse? Do they have the sense of how that fits in a context? Are they just bump, 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 bump? Or are we getting bum, 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 bum for those interesting rhythms? Then we'll step away from the rhythm for a second and teach them the chord progression. We'll teach them some harmonic chord tone functions and let them just kind of improvise bum, 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 without rhythm at first. Then, as they get comfortable, we'll have them start adding simple rhythms. Maybe we'll give them a rhythm, so all they have to think about is changing the pitch. As they become more comfortable, we'll say, go ahead, start trying to come up with your own rhythm while you change pitches. If we jump onto the next screen, we'll start having them combine those rhythm and chord tones, making up their own kind of outline of a melody. Again, as they get more comfortable, we're differentiating the instruction in that we're trying to push them to go a little bit more, a little bit more. So those kids that are really getting it, we'll ask them to go ahead and start adding the notes in between, some non-harmonic tones. Now, the best part of this is creating a SmartMusic file that contains a rhythm section accompaniment. That way, in the lesson, Kevin or I are at the piano and we're kind of banging away as best we can with my limited piano skills. Kevin's a much, much better piano player than I am. But then I can use that SmartMusic file and have a pretty good groove going on behind the students to see, are they comfortable improvising that melody with that external reinforcement of the rhythm section. But the best part is you can send that home for them to be able to practice at whatever level they're comfortable with. Is it just the bass line with an interesting rhythm? Is it maybe just a simple, perhaps quarter notes with changing the chord tones? Or are they a kid that's really, truly improvising a melody? And of course, it comes back to a rubric. We have a rubric to assess that. But we also, before we leave this, we know that composition is an extension of improvisation. So coming out of our early improvisation experiences for the kids, we'll then take them over to finale and have them start writing those improvisations down as a composition. And we'll actually take a further step and have them make a full arrangement and turn around and assign that arrangement to them as something that they can do as a small chamber group in their lesson. So on the next page, we have the rubric, and we called this a step rubric. I don't know if there's an official term for that, but we wanted to show that on the left-hand side, there's these different steps. Maybe a kid is only comfortable doing the bass line. Maybe they're comfortable doing a simple rhythm, keeping the same rhythm and starting to change the chord tones. Maybe they're up to being able to use a bunch of different rhythms, and maybe they're ready for non-harmonic tones. And then we can go from left to right for each of those levels, getting better and better. The goal is for a student to go from the upper left-hand corner down to the lower right-hand corner. And this way, we can have students submit their best improvisation through SmartMusic and then listen to it together as a group and talk about, where do you think that is on the rubric? Okay, well, hey, next time, why don't you try going the next step? You're doing a great job with that. Another thing that we do is we try to really teach the technical language of music and get them to focus on what a good tone is. An example of a way that we do that is we use SmartMusic and all the great repertoire and exemplar recordings that are in it for the students to listen to a piece that we're doing. Then we'll make a recording of our bands playing that piece and have the students do a compare and contrast, making sure they're using proper music terminology. And of course, you need to take time to define and discuss any unfamiliar terms. Having these conversations using the recordings and the rubrics as a reference really do help guide the development of both good individual and ensemble tones. And here's an example of coming back to that pretest. There is the tone rubric that we used in the pretest. It's coming back again in January, in February, as we can listen as we're preparing for the next concert going, you know, that's not quite right. Let's go back to that exemplar recording. What are you hearing? What's good? What needs to be improved?
All right, everybody, let's start with the concert B flat scale. Sing along with me. Bum, 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 bum. You know what? We'd start every rehearsal like that. And then we found out that in this pretest that every kid was able to do that. But the things they were struggling with was key signatures and triple meter. So why are we starting every rehearsal with something that they can already do? We start our rehearsals with something that they can't do to help reinforce that. Take a scale in a triple meter pattern, start it off. Change the key of that scale. Challenge them to start knowing those keys and be familiar with them. Push them to be a little bit harder, but take that duple meter feel out of it, put a triple meter feel out of it, and reinforce that. Those are the kind of things that we can do to help our kids. We can also assign scale and interval patterns to our kids using SmartMusic with a variety of key signatures and in a triple meter pattern, but do so at their individual level so that they can be successful. If a student is really struggling, give them something at a slower tempo that might be a little less challenging. If a student is advanced, why are we continuing to bore them? Let's challenge them and find something much more difficult for them to play. There's another video here that was just created recently. It's an assignment which can be individualized by student ability, and I think we'll let Giovanna talk about this if that's okay.
So what we see in this video is that we are actually looking for an exercise, and so we're gonna pull up intervals, major scales in triplets, 1 octave, and then we're gonna open it up to see what it looks like. This is the flute part, so you can see the range and what the intervals look like, and if you want to assign from there, you just go to the assessment menu and click assign, and then here's where you build your assignment. You type in some instructions, and then it comes a time where you can customize your assignment for the students. So let's say that we're looking at key recognition and triple meter. So in this case, we want keys that have more than 3 accidentals, and you can set up whatever tempo you want, type in any extra instructions, and once you have the part looking the way you want, you can either copy it to all the other instrument parts, or you could make different assignments in different keys and different tempo for each of the individual parts if you want. So in this case, we're going to open the B flat trumpet part and assign a different concert key. And so the key signature is going to look different. I think we picked D flat major there. And then instead of exactly tempo of 76, we could perhaps say at least 76, or maybe you can want to give freedom to your students to choose their tempo. And then again, you can save the part or copy it to other parts. So now we're just going to copy these same parameters to some of the other B flat instruments. So there's a bass clarinet and a clarinet and so on and so forth. And then once you've chosen the instruments you want, you're differentiating your instruction. Now, because we're just looking at key recognition and triple meter, the red and green note assessment by SmartMusic is sufficient because it looks at rhythm and pitch. And then we get to the part where you actually schedule the assignment to your students. So you could send it to the entire class, or again, because you're differentiating instruction, you can just send it to individual students who are a subset of your larger class. So that's how that works.
Terry.
Hi. Giovanna. So going on to the next slide. So this then takes us through the year. We began the year with a pre-assessment to get a baseline collection of data to try to figure out what our student individual strengths and weaknesses, as well as our group strengths and weaknesses. We've spent the year using SmartMusic to try to focus on their needs and improve where they need help, as well as putting on some pretty good concerts and a number of community outreach things and having a good quality program. So then at the end of the year, we have our post-assessment. And the goal of a post-assessment is to check for individual and group growth. For me, I look at the post-assessment as my test. The students are taking it, but really, how did I do in helping them improve their areas of need? So we made great effort to match both the logistics and procedure of our pre-assessment, trying our best to compare apples to apples. We used the exact same examples. We used the same rubrics for the human assessment. That way, we could make data comparisons on our spreadsheet, which of course gave us another giant pile of data. So this is just a small excerpt from a big honkin' Excel spreadsheet, but you can see there the 3 columns on the right showing how did our students do on the composition in terms of their growth? How did they do on their essay? And that final column, how did they do in their performance? And you'll notice that there's a couple of students who did worse on the post-test than they did on the pre-test. Most of the students, though, did grow to some amount. The process is very time-consuming, but that information is so valuable. It is valuable to us to allow us to differentiate instruction. It's also valuable when we're having conversations with students, with parents, and with administration about what it is that we do in our program. We also learned not to assume. The formal process highlighted a couple areas we didn't think were a concern. We thought, hey, we're great. Our kids are doing really, really well. But when we started looking at individual student performance, getting them out of the large ensemble, we began to identify some trends where students needed some extra help. An important thing, students must become familiar with SmartMusic through using it in lessons and home assignments. That goes to technology-based music instruction. When we are, as music teachers, are teaching, we have good information about how to teach and music. As soon as you add technology, you have to deal with where does technology overlap music instruction? Where does instruction overlap music? Where does how to teach that technology? So we've had to carefully develop some steps in our program to introduce students to SmartMusic and get them accustomed to using the software so that the problems they're having are the result of a musical need, not because they're just not comfortable with the technology. And as we're looking into the future, what we found is that we've repeated the test a couple of years and the students started recognizing the examples. So we are looking at furthering this process and making some grade-specific tests so that students have the 9th grade version, the 10th grade, the 11th grade version. But we want to be careful so that we can make true apples-to-apples comparisons when we look back longitudinally from how is a kid doing as a senior graduating from our program compared to where they were as a freshman.
And I'm going to piggyback off that because I did see a question came in about, are the students familiar with the program? And of course we utilize it. And it's not a surprise to anybody, I'm sure, watching us, that the kids had absolutely no trouble using the software itself, the computer. They just hop on the computers and fly with it. That's not the surprise. What we were surprised at first was they have no idea how to practice using that technology. They didn't know how to repeat it at a slower tempo so that they could get it right. What they were doing, we found, was they were just going from the beginning to the end as many times as it took to get 100%. So we do spend a lot of time in our lessons teaching them how to practice, how to woodshed, how to gather the skills in order to be successful. The goal is not the 100. The goal is the skill to get the 100. So we do spend a lot of time teaching that skill.
Yes, and to that end, I just wanted to let everybody know that earlier in May, we had a webinar session with Bob Phillips that was all about practice. It's called Get Kids to Practice and Turbocharge Their Results, a masterclass with Bob Phillips, and it is available on our YouTube channel. So just go to YouTube and just search for that video on the Smart Music channel, okay?
Fantastic. That's right. Evaluating the process. We're almost done. We're going to take some questions here. At the conclusion of every year, evaluate what's done, the results and the test itself in order to improve. Don't rest on your laurels. Always look for improvement. The effective grouping of students in the future is going to help it's based on needs as opposed to based on what their grade level is, because that certainly is never the same. Meet the needs of the weak kids, make them successful, but also challenge your tough kids. Otherwise, they're just going to get bored. So you've got to find that mix, and you've got to give them both opportunities to succeed. I'm blessed with working with a colleague he's the brains of the entire outfit, and all I have is the old age on my side. And it's so beneficial to us sitting together and talking about our kids. If there's somebody that you can sit down with that can actually have these conversations, you're going to find yourself validating what you have believed in and also challenging yourself in what you were never sure of. Do not be afraid to make changes. They're going to happen, and that's how you get better. In conclusion, it works for us. Greater insights in our program, the measurement, the evaluation, the test design, we continually look at it short term, and now we're starting to gather years and years of data so we can compare all of those things. It's just invaluable to us. So it just allows us to keep focused on improving the music instruction for our individual student needs. And now I think we can take some questions.
Yeah, and we won't get every single one because of timing, but I'm responding privately to some of you some of these questions. There's one that came in a while ago. Do you test for all these skills in the pre-assessment at once? How long does it take if this is the case?
Sure, I can grab that. When we were designing the test, that was a concern for us. That's why we picked some specific things we wanted to look at, and we picked some very short examples. So the kids had about 60 seconds to look to practice, and then it didn't take very long. So each student only took about 10 minutes for ours. Earlier, we talked about our choral colleague. He had to have his kids go one at a time. So he used fewer examples. That way, he was able to collect some data, get some insight into how his students were performing, while still keeping that part of your test design manageable.
Okay, great. Let me see if I can throw this in here. I thought this was kind of interesting. Have you found the grades kids earn have remained about the same as prior to using all this assessment approach? Have the grades gone down or up? Is it harder to get an A or easier to get an A? How's this affected the grading that you do?
I'm a little unclear on the grading as in terms of the SmartMusic grade they're receiving or the report card grade. And neither one really reflects on learning. So I think what's happened is because we're individualizing instruction, students that would normally get what you would call a low grade because their skills aren't quite at the level of that one kid that studies privately and is all state, are now getting grades that are more comparable to where they deserve the grade. If they're learning, if they're growing, their grade should show that they're growing. If they're extraordinary and they're not getting any better, the grade should reflect that. So I hope that answers that question.
And the clarification from Larry was the report card grade, but I guess I agree with when I was teaching, I think for so many teachers, you have this grade, but it really probably doesn't go deep enough on what they learned and differentiation. So I think we'll kind of leave it at that. It sounds like what you're grading now is is actually more on helping them learn. Let's see. And a couple of these other questions are really pretty specific.
Here's another question. Someone is asking, have you looked into the new version of SmartMusic? If so, what are you thinking of doing moving forward? And to that extent, we just did a couple of webinar sessions precisely on that topic, why switch to the new SmartMusic. And we have recordings posted on the YouTube channel. So I think I would just invite you to watch that recording and see the comparison and just kind of decide for yourself. But also, if Kevin or Terry want to comment on it too, go ahead.
I'd be glad to jump on that. I'm very familiar with the new SmartMusic. I am extremely familiar with the Classic. We have hung on to Classic this long just because our almost our entire program is based on it, and there would be some adjustment involved. But I'm now comfortable enough to say the new SmartMusic has come along to the point where I'm comfortable making the change, and we will be making the change. There's no doubt in my mind, because there are some advantages to the new SmartMusic that I want to take advantage of. So we will be making that change. I can't guarantee it's going to happen right away, but we are certainly going to make it very soon.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're up against the clock, so I think Giovanna's going to do a little wrap up, and then perhaps after that is formally finished, we might just hang on for a couple of minutes if there's a couple other questions.
Yes, so if you are interested in giving the new SmartMusic a try, we invite you to go to our website, www.smartmusic.com, and the webpage looks like what you see on screen. And there you can start for free. There's a big button that says Educators Start for Free. Typically that has you fill out a form, and then Sales creates what we call a teach free platform. But because you are attending this webinar today, if you enter the code differentiated learning into the comments box, they will give you a 30-day free trial to the entire catalog, so a 30-day full access trial. Additionally, we also have training available in the form of e-learning. So in the next slide, where you can see the arrow pointing to the word training, when you click on that, you can access the registration form for our e-learning, and we're in 3 levels, from exploring the catalog and learning about the navigation to creating assignments, enrolling students in classes, etc. And then the last level would be on creating your own content. We issue clock hours for it, and you get product certification. So those are things for you to check out as well. We are also on all the social media channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. So come check us out, have a conversation with us, be part of the community. We really look forward to talking with you that way. And with that, I think now it's my pleasure to again thank Terry and Kevin for their wonderful sharing of information today. We sincerely hope that it's been helpful to all of you. And so this is the end of our session today, and thank you so very much for joining us. Bye-bye.